Hello students, welcome to the EPG Pathshala course on crime prevention. I am Dr. Vidya-mitra from the Rajalakshmi Engineering College, and here I am going to discuss with you the module on Deterrence, a conventional program. In this module, we will be trying to understand the meaning of deterrence, the theoretical underpinnings of deterrence, general and specific deterrence, and the current theoretical directions of deterrence, focused deterrence, hotspot policing, and community policing. First, let us look at the definition of deterrence. Deterrence is the principal mechanism by which the state authority seeks to reduce offending and increase public safety. It is the preventive aspiration of criminal justice. This may be in the form of preventive patrol by police officers or mandatory prison sentences for violent offenders. The paradigm of deterrence is based on the premise that any offender or potential offender seeks rewards and avoids losses. Any act that carries a penalty will be avoided provided that penalty is swift, reliable, and causes heavy loss. Deterrence is the use of punishment as a threat to deter people from offending. Deterrence is often contrasted with retributivism, which holds that punishment is a necessary consequence of a crime and should be calculated based on the gravity of the wrong done. Now, we look at deterrence theory. Deterrence is a theory form, behavioral psychology about preventing or controlling actions or behavior through fear of punishment or retribution. This theory of criminology is shaping the criminal justice system of the United States and various other countries. Deterrence can be divided into two separate categories: general deterrence, which is designed to prevent crime in the general population. Thus, the state's punishment of offenders serves as an example for others in the general populations who have not yet participated in criminal events. It is meant to make them aware of the horrors of official sanctions in order to put them off committing crimes. Examples include the application of the death penalty and the use of corporal punishment. Specific deterrence is designed by the nature of the proscribed sanctions to deter only the individual offender from committing that crime in the future. Proponents of specific deterrence also believe that punishing offenders severely will make them unwilling to re-offend in the future. A drunk driver, for example, would be deterred from drinking and driving because of the unpleasant experience he or she suffered after being arrested or having his or her license taken away from their car, impounded. The state must apply enough pain to offset the amount of pleasure derived from drinking. Now we look at history of the deterrence theory. The deterrence theory of punishment can be traced to the early works of classical philosophers such as Thomas Hobbes, Cesare Beccaria, and Jeremy Bentham. Together, these theorists protested against the legal policies that were founded on spiritualistic explanations of the time. These thinkers provided the foundation for modern deterrence theory in criminology. Severity, certainty, and celerity of punishment. The theory of deterrence that has developed from the work of Hobbes, Beccaria, and Bentham relies on three individual components: severity, certainty, and celerity. The more severe a punishment, it is thought, the more likely that a rationally calculating human being will desist from criminal acts. To prevent crime, therefore, criminal law must emphasize penalties to encourage citizens to obey the law. Punishment that is too severe is unjust, and punishment that is not severe enough will not deter criminals from committing crimes. Certainty of punishment simply means making sure that punishment takes place whenever a criminal act is committed. Classical theorists such as Beccaria believed that if individuals know that their undesirable acts will be punished, they will refrain from offending in the future. Moreover, their punishment must be swift in order to deter crime. The closer the application of punishment is to the commission of the offense, the greater the likelihood that offenders will realize that crime does not pay. In short, deterrence theorists believed that if punishment is severe, certain and swift. A rational person will measure the gains and losses before engaging in crime and will be deterred from violating the law if the loss is greater than the gain. Classical philosophers thought that certainty is more effective in preventing crime than the severity of crime. They rejected torture as a means of eliciting confessions and the death penalty as an effective means for punishing murderers and perpetrators of serious crime. Current research on deterrence is as follows. The current hypothesis continues to be a key element of Western criminal law and criminal justice systems. Today, the idea that sanctions deter criminals has influenced penal sanctions in death penalty cases and other areas of criminal sentencing. It is believed that better deterrence can be achieved by establishing of more prisons, increased penalties, longer sentencing severity, certainty of conviction and sentencing, and the hiring of more police officers. Together, these policies would control and reduce the recidivism of convicted offenders and curtail the participation in crime by future offenders. Yet, despite the merits of the deterrence argument, and until 1969, when criminology started again to test the deterrence hypothesis, empirical measurement of the theory have been scant. Prior to the 1960s, studies focused only on the philosophical ideas of the deterrence doctrine, its humanitarian orientation and its implication for punishment. One popular research endeavor that actually tested the deterrence theory in 1968 concluded that homicide might be deterred by both certainty and severity of punishment. In research conducted in 1969, criminologist Charles Tittle found support for the theory and concluded that the certainty of punishment deters crime, but that severity can only deter crime when certainty of punishment is reasonably guaranteed. Other studies in the 1970s have also challenged the validity of the earlier empirical findings, arguing instead that variations in police record keeping could account for the results on certainty. When it comes to celerity of punishment, prior and current studies have generally avoided its inclusion in deterrence measurement. Most important, much of the empirical analysis of the deterrence value have been focused on whether capital punishment deters potential offenders from engaging in homicide acts. Collectively, the empirical results of the death penalty studies have concluded that death penalty does not deter murder. Now we look at focused deterrence, which is a conventional program. Focused deterrence strategies, also referred to as pulling levers policing or problem-oriented policing strategies, that follow the core principles of deterrence theory. The strategies target specific criminal behavior committed by a small number of chronic offenders who are vulnerable to sanctions and punishments. Offenders are directly confronted and informed that continued criminal behavior will not be tolerated. Targeted offenders are also told how the criminal justice system, such as the police and the prosecutors, will respond to continued criminal behavior, mainly that all potential sanctions or levers will be applied. The deterrence-based message is reinforced through crackdowns on offenders or groups of offenders, such as gang members, who continue to commit crime despite the warning. In addition to deterring violent behavior, the strategies also reward compliance and non-violent behavior among the targeted offenders by providing positive incentives such as access to social services and job opportunities. Now we look at target population focused deterrence strategies. Generally, these target a specific type or a group of offenders, such as youth gang members or repeat violent offenders. Many focused deterrence interventions have primarily targeted incidents of homicide and serious violence, criminal activities that usually involve chronic offenders in urban settings. Some strategies have focused on eliminating public forms of drug dealing, such as street markets and crack houses. These strategies are known as drug market interventions, and they work by warning dealers, buyers and their families that enforcement is imminent. Second, the theoretical foundations of focused deterrence program. Focused deterrence strategies combine elements of classic deterrence with additional elements thought to prevent crime. First, focused deterrence strategies typically begin with an intense focus on particular types of crime and the chronic offenders most responsible for carrying out those crimes. The most frequent target of focused deterrence strategies is gun violence. Second, focused deterrence strategies are often referred to as pulling levers strategies because they seek to apply every lever available, whether formal or informal, in deterring offenders. Third, unlike conventional deterrence strategies which may alter objective sanction risks, focused strategies, deterrence strategies seek to directly influence perceived sanction risk among offenders by communicating directly with them about the consequences of their actions. An important part of altering perceived risk among offenders is administering sanctions swiftly so that potential offenders can observe the immediate consequences of their actions. Finally, since many focused deterrence strategies target groups like street gangs rather than individuals, another key element is the idea of collective responsibility, that is, holding all the members of the group responsible for the actions of any individual member. Together, these program elements are intended to influence the perceived risk of sanction among potential offenders, thereby altering their decision about whether or not to carry out an offense. Third, the framework of focused deterrence programs. Focused deterrence framework was developed by Boston. In Boston during 1990s, Operation Ceasefire was a problem-oriented policing project to stop serious gang violence by directly communicating to gang members that violence would no longer be tolerated and backing up that message by pulling every lever legally available when violence occurred. At the same time, youth workers, probation and parole officers and other community-based organizations offered services and resources to gang members. At a general level, the approach of focused deterrence strategies includes the following: selecting a particular crime problem such as youth homicide, convening an interagency working group that may include law enforcement, social service and community-based practitioners, developing a response to offenders or groups of offenders that use a variety of sanctions or pulling levers to stop continued violent behavior, then focusing social services and community resources on target offenders to match the prevention efforts by law enforcement and directly and continually communicating with offenders to make them understand why they are receiving special attention. The fourth part we are going to deal with is hotspots policing. Over the past 2 decades, a series of rigorous evaluations have suggested that police can be effective in addressing crime and disorder when they focus in on small units of geography with high rates of crime. These areas are typically referred to as hotspots, and policing strategies and tactics focused on these areas are referred to as hotspots policing or place-based policing. This place-based focus stands in contrast to traditional notions of policing and crime prevention, more generally which have often focused primarily on people, police beats, precincts and districts, determine the allocation of police resources and dictate how police respond to calls and patrol the city. With place-based policing, however, the concern is with much smaller units of geography than the police have typically focused upon. Places here refer to specific locations within the larger social environment or communities and neighborhoods, such as addresses, blocks of streets or small clusters of addresses or blocks of smaller streets. Crime prevention effectiveness is maximized when police focus their resources on these micro units of geography. Hotspots policing covers a range of police responses that all share in common a focus of resources on the locations where crime is highly concentrated. Just as the definition of hotspot varies across studies and contexts from addresses to segments of streets to cluster of streets, so do the specific tactics police use to address high crime places. There is not one way to implement hotspots policing. The approaches can vary across interventions. For example, the strategies of place-based policing can be as simple as drastically increasing officer time spent at hotspots, as was the case in Minneapolis hotspots patrol experiment. But place-based policing can also take a much more complex approach to the amelioration of crime problems. In the Jersey City, New Jersey drug market analysis program experiment, for example, a 3-step program including identifying and analyzing programs, developing tailored responses and maintaining crime control gains was used to reduce problems at drug hotspots. Also in the same place, a problem-oriented policing (POP) approach was taken in developing a specific strategy for each of the small areas defined as violent crime hotspots. Predictive policing shares in common a focus on place-based prevention efforts, although the focus is more on predicting where crime is likely to occur in the future rather than responding to past or ongoing crime concentrations. Studies have indicated that focused police resources on crime hotspots provided the strongest collective evidence of police effectiveness, suggesting that when police focus in on a crime hotspot, they can have a significant beneficial impact on crime in these areas. As research concluded, extent evaluation research seems to provide fairly robust evidence that hotspot policing is an effective crime prevention strategy. In another research meta-analysis of experimental and quasi-experimental studies, they found that an overall significant average effect of hotspots policing suggested a meaningful benefit of the hotspots approach in treatment areas compared to control areas. Importantly, there was little evidence to suggest that spatial displacement was a major concern in hotspots intervention. Crime did not simply shift from hotspots to nearby areas. The Minneapolis hotspots patrol experiment suggested that increased police presence alone leads to some crime and disorder reduction. Officers were not given specific instructions on what activities to engage in while in hotspots. They were simply told to increase patrol time in the treatment hotspots. Now, another research found that each additional minute of time officers spent in a hotspot increased the amount of time after officers departed before disorderly activity occurred until a plateau was reached. The ideal time spent in the hotspot was about 14 to 15 minutes. The best approach for saturation police is for the police to travel between hotspots, spending about 15 minutes in each hotspot and moving from hotspot to hotspot in an unpredictable manner so that potential offenders recognize a greater cost of offending in these areas because police enforcement would increase at any moment. These recommendations were applied to a hotspots experiment in Sacramento, where in treatment hotspots received 15-minute visits from patrol visits approximately every 2 hours. The intervention was associated with declines in calls and serious incidents. An effective approach for dealing with crime hotspots is having officers incorporate principles from problem-oriented policing. A recent experiment in Jacksonville, Florida was the first study to compare different hotspots treatments in the same study, with one treatment group receiving a more standard saturation patrol response and the second receiving a problem-oriented response that focused on officers analyzing problems in the hotspot and responding with a more tailored solution. Results showed a decrease in crime, though not a statistically significant decrease. This decrease was in the saturation patrol hotspots, but this decrease lasted only during the 90-day intervention period. In the POP hotspots, there was no significant crime decline during the intervention period, but in the 90 days after the experiment, street violence declined by a statistically significant percent. Problem-solving approaches may take more time to show beneficial results, but any successes that come from a problem-oriented framework may be more long-lasting in nature. We now look at community policing. Community policing is one of the best known and the most widely accepted police innovation of the past 3 decades. Research suggests that close to 100% of larger agencies claim to have adopted community policing. Community policing spans a broad range of programs, from neighborhood newsletters and neighborhood substations to foot patrol and neighborhood watch. Neighborhood watch programs vary in their level of police involvement, but police are often important in the initial organization and coordination of the watch groups. Community policing definitions typically focus on three components that characterize many programs. One, some level of community involvement and consultation. Second, decentralization, often increasing discretion to line level officers. And third, problem solving, because community policing is focused on close collaboration with the community and addressing community problems. It has often been seen as an effective way to increase citizen satisfaction and enhance the legitimacy of the police. Next, we look at police legitimacy and procedural justice. Police legitimacy is important to consider because of the importance of police trying to maximize their fairness and citizen perception of the legitimacy of their actions. Procedural justice, according to Tyler, includes four components. One, citizens need to participate in the decision process, that is, they should be given a voice. Second, neutrality is a key element. Citizens tend to view a situation as fairer when officers are transparent about why they are resolving a dispute in a particular way. And third one, individuals want to be treated with dignity and respect. Fourth one, citizens are more likely to view an interaction as fair when they trust the motives of the police. Citizens will view the action taken as fairer if the officer shows a genuine concern for the interests of the parties involved. Survey and observational research generally suggests that when officers incorporate these components of procedural justice into their interactions with citizens and suspects, citizens are more likely to comply with police directives and the law because they see that police as more legitimate. These increases in legitimacy thus have the potential to reduce crime by increasing compliance behavior, although no studies to date have examined this issue directly. The connection between legitimacy perceptions and compliance behavior suggests that a possible link is there between community outreach efforts that increase levels of legitimacy and reduced crime. As some researchers have noted, the capacity of police legitimacy to prevent crime is something community policing may well be effective at creating. For example, door-to-door visits by officers seems to be an effective approach for both increasing citizen satisfaction and reducing levels of victimization. Now, some researchers found that efforts by police in a target neighborhood in Houston to initiate more positive informal contacts with citizens led to lower rate of victimization. The program focused on the quality of police-citizen interactions. Aspects of community policing can be combined with other successful interventions in ways that may increase their overall effectiveness. For example, some researchers describe a community-oriented approach to hotspots policing focused on community consultation on the tactics used in hotspots and the efforts to ensure that hotspot policing strategies do not damage police-residents relationships. As these researchers indicate, dealing with hotspot locations in a collaborative and transparent way has great potential to improve police-community relations and enhance overall police legitimacy. Procedural justice and community policing were both emphasized in the recommendations to President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. For example, the task force recommends that law enforcement culture should embrace a guardian mindset to build public trust and legitimacy. Toward that end, police departments should adopt procedural justice as the guiding principle for internal and external policies and practices to guide their interactions with the citizens they serve. In the area of community policing, the task force focused in particular on community participation. The task force recommended using strategies that reinforce the importance of community engagement in managing public safety and the working with neighborhood residents to co-produce public safety through problem-solving efforts. Some researchers conducted a Campbell systematic review to examine the impact of community policing on crime and disorder, fear of crime, legitimacy, and citizen satisfaction. Their results suggested a small impact on violent crime, a non-significant impact on property crime, and a small effect on fear of crime. Community policing programs, therefore, may be one way for the police to incorporate principles of procedural justice into their interactions with citizens and as a result improve police-community relations. In a related systematic review, particular researchers examined police interventions designed to enhance procedural justice and increase citizen perceptions of police legitimacy. They focused on interventions that incorporated at least one component of procedural justice: participation, neutrality, dignity, respect, trustworthy motives, and their findings suggested that the promise of police efforts to enhance legitimacy, although their review covered a range of studies, most of which included multiple kinds of interventions, making it difficult to disentangle the specific impact of procedural justice, there was evidence that these interventions increased citizen satisfaction, cooperation, and levels of procedural justice. Bennett and colleagues looked specifically at the effectiveness of neighborhood watch programs and found overall that neighborhood watch is associated with a significant crime reduction, suggesting further crime control benefits for this type of community policing program. There are several similarities and overlapping features between focused deterrence strategies and other policing models such as community-oriented, problem-oriented, and hotspot policing. Community-oriented policing draws on a variety of approaches to address crime and disorder issues. Often, partnerships are formed between law enforcement and organizations outside of policing, especially community-based groups. Hotspots policing strategies rely mostly on traditional law enforcement approaches. However, police powers and resources are directed towards dealing with a specific crime-ridden area or group of offenders. Problem-oriented policing combines the resources targeting strategies of hotspots policing with the variety of approaches of community-oriented policing. That is focused deterrence strategies rely primarily on problem-oriented policing approach, but also use elements of community-oriented policing. For example, forming partnerships between the police and the community-based organizations through the creation of an interagency work group. Finally, this module looked at many criminal justice policies which are based on deterrence doctrine, and therefore a lot of debates on the deterrence effect of punishment continues to be waged in criminological history. In their efforts to have more empirical support, criminologists today are working in the direction of expanding the deterrence concepts from certainty, severity, and celerity to include informal social processes of reward and moral beliefs. Since some aspects of deterrence and rational choice theories are part of the routine activities theory, deterrence theories have been modified and expanded to include the rational choice perspectives. In summary, support for deterrence theory is much greater than it has been during the past few decades. However, research demonstrates that contemporary criminal justice policies place more emphasis on the severity of punishment than it places on certainty. Death penalty, longer imprisonments, mandatory sentencing, and a plethora of others get-tough policies have not demonstrated greater deterrent effects of punishments than less severe penalties. Increases in the severity of punishment rather than reduce crime may actually increase it. On the other hand, increases in the certainty of apprehension of offenders, convictions, and punishment have been found to have possible effects on crime reduction. Thank you, students. Thank you for watching EPG Pathshala course on crime prevention.